This is part 2 of God's calendar. Trying to give you just a little tidbits each week as we get ready for festivals and remind you, many of you have been celebrating the festivals for many years, but some of us are new, and all of us need to be reminded of how it all works. So I'm giving you just some principles every week about how we arrive at these times. This God's calendar is actually in contrast with the Gregorian calendar, and that's the calendar that we use. Here's the 2018 Gregorian calendar. You'll see if you look at it carefully, it's got 52 weeks and the 12 months and the way it's divided. It's a solar calendar. It came into existence, was adopted in 1582. It's named after Pope Gregory the 13th, and he introduced it right at the end of 1582. And it replaced the Julian calendar that was begun by Julius Caesar. He instituted that calendar, and most of the world adapted and adopted it from 46 BC on. So these calendars hang on for a long time. And don't think this Gregorian calendar is going to go away this year, but who knows what's going to happen, because when Messiah returns, we're not going to do the Gregorian calendar again, right? So an advantage for us is to know a little bit about God's timing and God's calendars. And so we're gonna look at that a little bit more. This Gregorian calendar is a solar calendar, and God's calendar is a calendar that's based on the moon cycle, the lunar cycle, and built into it are God's feasts. So when you read the scriptures and it tells you, like you go to Leviticus 23 and it tells you the date of every festival, if you don't understand God's calendar, then you don't know when they are. The years begin in the spring after the barley harvest, and we see that ours begin midwinter, and so the number of months is thrown off, and the way the months are calculated are different too. In the last session, we talked about the principle that God teaches us. We began in Genesis. Within the first few verses, we see this principle, and we worked through light from darkness. We looked at a lot of the scriptures all the way through. It talks about the physical, and the beginning, the creation was darkness, and it came to light. And we see the days are in darkness and come to light. And we see that the moon cycle starts with the conjunction and goes to light and returns. And we see how that works all the way through, that biblical principle that we look at. We saw that it applies also to the spiritual. We saw a number of verses in the Psalms and other places. Isaiah talks about it, that God has turned my darkness into light. So it's not only a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing that changes us. Now, we're in August 2018, and so I'm going to try to show you how to adapt some of these things into what we're doing. The principle that we learned last week is that the day begins at sunset, right? So if you superimpose on this calendar today, which is the 18th, right? Oh, and by the way, did you know, I heard, I think it's on radio, or maybe I read it on the internet, I'm not sure, that today is the most popular wedding date of any day this year or in the past decade, because it is 8/18/18. Who could forget that? Huh? The ladies all picked that date so that the husbands would make sure. Well, so today, if you try to put this together, you'll see that on the 17th on the Gregorian calendar, last evening as the sun set, today began. Now, that throws everything in a kink in your thinking if you've never looked at that before. So today started, and in just a little while, when the sun sets, not when it gets dark, But when the sun sets, tomorrow begins on God's calendar. So that's the way the festivals work and the way God teaches us. Now, that is all in relation to darkness and light, and the moon cycle comes into that. So, you may know, but on the 20th, on Sunday the 20th, we're going to have a full moon. Now, you can find that out. One of the things you can do is put an app on your phone. There's a lot of free apps. I have one that's just called Phases of the Moon. And you can manipulate it. When you open it up, it shows you today, and the clock as it's ticking tells you the exact time, and it tells you exactly the percentage of the moon. And it just, as it ticks by, it shows you. But you can put your finger on there, and you can go back and forth, and you can see. You can pick out a particular date, and it tells you, is the moon a quarter moon or a half moon, full moon, or whatever it is. And you can look at that. You can get on NASA's website. They have the same sort of thing. So as we look at how this works, here's a quick diagram. So the sun itself is giving out light, and this at the bottom is where I'm going to start with you. And so the sun is emitting light onto the earth, and the earth is in the center. And the moon is between us, and when the moon is exactly between us, that doesn't show up very well, but you can see what I'm talking about. When the moon's exactly between the earth and the sun, it's a new moon, because we see the backside that's dark, and the other side is the sun. Now, actually, if it gets exactly between us, it is a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. But as the cycle moves, now you have to remember that the sun is stationary, the earth is revolving around the sun, and it is turning on its axis, and it's tilted a little bit. And the moon is revolving around the sun. So all that plays into it. So the moon starts with position number 1 as a new moon, black to us. If you're on the earth and you're looking toward the sun, you see the moon because the sun has the backside of it. And then it begins to wax, gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and by the time it gets to the third position, it is a quarter. The first quarter happens. And then number 5 is a full moon, okay? So next week on Sunday, we're going to have a full moon on the 20th, and then it'll begin to wane. So what we're interested in is the 7th month, which is very soon. That's when the festivals, the fall festivals happen. So we mark that with the new moon. The next new moon that we see will be the beginning of the 7th month, okay? Now, I'm going to show you very quick. You have to watch the NASA's website in their imaging of what the moon looks like. It goes by extremely fast. But I'm going to start with August 1 and let it roll up until we find a new moon and see how it works. I'm going to show you a couple of things. So if you watch the screen, I'll see if I can make this thing work, okay? New moon, okay? It actually, if you can read it, I let it go just a tenth of a second too long, and it started over here, started waning, and it says it's August 27th. But actually, August 26th is a perfect full moon. That's going to be Sunday. Now, we're going to turn it on and let it run until we have, that's full moon. Is that what I said? Yeah, okay. We're looking for the new moon to set the date of the festivals. There's your new moon. That is September the 9th. So we begin the 7th month on September the 9th. All right? So you can mark that on your calendar, your Gregorian calendar. So here it is. So we realize that the new moon comes on the 9th of September. So that's day 1. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. What time does it come? 8:24. Forgot to show you that on there. So it's 8:24 on the 9th on the Gregorian calendar. So really that's on the 10th, right? So day 1 is going to be on the 10th. And we're going to count down to day 10 because in Leviticus 23 and other places it tells us that you begin counting on day 1 of the 7th month, and on the 10th day, what happens? The Day of Atonement. Okay? So we mark that on the Day of Atonement. That's a Wednesday. This is called a festival of the Lord in the Scripture, but it's the only one that doesn't involve feasting. Okay? It is a time of denying yourself. It's a time of fasting. It's a time of introspection, talking to God, praying. We're going to meet that evening, although it begins at sunset on the 9th and goes through the 18th and goes through the 19th. We'll meet that evening. We won't have a meal, though, okay? And we will pray, and we'll read Scripture, and we'll examine ourselves, and we'll talk about the Day of Atonement. So then after the 10th day, we know that we go to the 15th day, and that day instigates the beginning day of the Feast of Tabernacles. So Tabernacles, according to the Gregorian calendar, starts on the evening of the 14th and concludes 8 days later. Okay? So we're going to be going to Palo Duro Canyon, as we've done the last several years, and our services will kick off on 14th, on the 23rd, getting those dates wrong there, right? The 14th of the 7th month, or the 23rd of September, in the evening. That'll be the beginning. And that day is a Sabbath. Some will say it's a high holy day. But the Scriptures teach us that the first day of Tabernacles is a Sabbath, and the last day of Tabernacles is a Sabbath. So in that week, 10-day period, we have 4 Sabbaths. We have the Saturday Sabbath and the Monday Sabbath, and the Saturday Sabbath and the Monday Sabbath. That's interesting, isn't it? So I forgot to tell you about day 1 is what? The Feast of Trumpets. Yom Teruah. We're going to go to the Lone Star Amphitheater in Palo Duro Canyon, and we're going to have a day. If you want to come anytime during that day, we're going to have just activities and fun and fellowship. We can have a picnic lunch together at noon, however you want to do that. Later in the afternoon, about 6 o'clock, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about that later, we'll start our actual services, and we're going to celebrate the Feast of Trumpets. Now, how do you celebrate the Feast of Trumpets? Well, we know from the Scripture that you blow the shofar, right? And that you celebrate. So celebration in the Bible, from David and from all the Psalms and from everything that we can find, is about praising God with music, with dancing, with celebration, with sharing together. That's what we're going to do. It's going to be a great, great time on the Feast of Trumpets. And we realize that festivals teach us how to celebrate our relationship with God.